Hey guys, welcome back to the Uncommodified podcast and to another UNCORK Conversation. This conversation is going to be an inspiring, provocative one for sure. My guest today is Alain Hunkins. Alain, thanks very much for joining me on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So let me tell you a little bit about Alain and then we'll get into our topic. As a lot of my guests these days, we seem to connect on LinkedIn. It's a tremendous, great networking platform, and that's how we originally connected. And obviously, you have some relationship with people that I do. And, you know, it's the 6 degrees of separation. We find ourselves in this grand journey. But let me tell you a little bit about Alain and his background, because this is really important. And one of the things I find fascinating, you know, when we think about people's backgrounds, when I reached out to you and asked you, how would I introduce you, I was intrigued by the way your first part of your bio started, because it says, Alain, that you help high-achieving people become high-achieving leaders, which was interesting to me because you would assume that high-achieving people just naturally become high-achieving leaders, but I get the sense in that phrase that's not always true. Is that correct, sir?
One might assume that they become high achieving leaders. No, that is, in fact, that is, I think, in so many ways, the crux of the challenge, which is so many people who wind up, maybe get promoted into formal leadership roles, got there because they were high achievers, right? They were high performers. They got stuff done. They went, for example, you're in sales. Tim, you're a good salesperson. Let's make you the sales manager. Well, the skill set to become a great leader is not the same as the skill set to be that great individual contributor, high performer. And the challenge that a lot of us have is, but I was so successful, I'll just try to do more of what I was doing. And of course, if you do what you did, you're just going to get more of what you got. And that isn't the great leap. You have to make this wonderful, momentous leap from shifting out of the mindset of being a doer who's trying to deliver results and actually step into what I call the facilitative mindset, which is around how do you facilitate, and that word facile, which means the word easy in French. How do you make things easy for the people who you lead to deliver results? Completely different skill set. And so, so my role I see is to help people close that gap and to accelerate their learning curve from being that high achiever to becoming a high achieving leader.
All that from the first little phrase in your bio. See, this is what the great thing of conversation is. So listen, over Alain's 20-year plus career, he's worked with over 2,000 groups in 25 different countries. Client companies like Walmart, Pfizer, Citigroup, State Farm Insurance, General Electric, IBM, General Motors, Microsoft, and lots of others. In addition to all this, he's a leadership speaker, consultant, trainer, coach, and an author of a phenomenal book that we want to talk about a little bit today, Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders, published by Wiley. If you haven't heard about this book, if you don't have this book, and you are a leader or you want to be a leader, this is a book you need to read. This is a book, actually, that I came across a number of months ago, just in my own journey, and found it phenomenally helpful. And the first thing I did is I always look on the back cover to see, you know, who thinks this book is good. And I'll tell you something, some of the top leadership luminaries really in the world have high regard for your book, Alain, and that tells me a lot about it. So great on you for writing it for us. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. If you don't own that book, you need to get it. Alain's also a faculty member of Duke Corporate Education and serves on the academic board of advisors of the New Delhi Institute of Management, that's interesting to me, and maybe we'll talk about a little bit of that. That seems, I wonder how that happened. That's really fascinating to me. You're a regular leadership strategy contributor to Forbes. In addition, you've been featured in Fast Company, Inc., Chief Executive, Chief Learning Officer, and the Business Insider. And I believe in 2021, in this year, you've received an extremely distinguished recognition. You are now recognized by People Hum as one of the top 100 global inspirational leaders, which, wow, that's a phenomenal achievement. How does that happen, Alain?
Well, I think how that happened, a lot of these things happen through people finding out about you and your work. And so People Hum is an organization that I had done some work. I'd done a podcast on one of their sister companies. And I guess when they did all their tallying and the voting, I came in the top 100. So it was a huge honor to do. So for sure.
Well, congratulations. It's a
Thanks.
great, it's a great accolade, but more than anything, it's a testimony to the clear and concise work that you do with people. Because if you're not achieving results, obviously, you're not providing inspiration. True inspiration results, I suppose, in the actions and the catalyzing of people towards something. So that is really a phenomenal honor. And as all great conversations on my show, they kick off with a drink, sometimes a beer, sometimes a wine, sometimes scotch. But today, with the hour we're doing this at, I think you've got some water and I got some tea. So cheers to you, sir, and we'll kick
Hey,
things off.
cheers, uncorked, Tim. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, if it wasn't 2 in the afternoon, we might be drinking something else here.
Well, although my guests do know that every once in a while I interview somebody or have a conversation with somebody across the pond or in Europe, and it's nighttime for them, and so sometimes I have to have a 6 a.m. scotch. Now, I don't like to talk about it a lot, but it happens. It does. I fess up. It does happen. All right, let's get into this conversation. So the theme we want to explore today is a theme that was represented in some articles that you've recently published and written. And it's around this idea around what you call the Great Resignation. And that's where we want to sit this conversation in today, the Great Resignation. So let's just start at this. What is it?
What
What
is
is
the
the
Great
Great
Resignation?
Resignation?
Yeah, what is it? That's a great question. So, if you look at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, they keep track of how many people resign in their jobs. Well, in April of 2021, we set a new record, like by a landslide. We had 4.3 million people all decide, I quit. And the month after was 3.5 million. So we have had people heading for the exits in record numbers, and that continues to go on since then. So that's what the Great Resignation is.
Wow. And so when you look at this and this word great, you're using this word great. So just park on that for a second. What is great about it? Is it just great in volume and size? Is it great in complexity? Is it great in opportunity? I mean, how do I understand what is so great about this in multiple ways?
Yeah, so I think great probably has two main meanings. One is it's, yeah, great in terms of volume. Certainly, we've never seen numbers like this too in the past. The other thing that I think what makes this great is that this is a collective decision. I mean, people don't necessarily quit their jobs lightly. And so the idea that has been coming on the tail end of something else that we've been dealing with, which was the great pandemic of 2020 moving into 2021. And I think you'd have to be a fool to not recognize how these two events are not connected, right? The fact is, that's pretty clear what was going on, that as people started to see the clouds start to lift. Now, I know we have got the Delta variant going on and all of this, but people start to see, oh, well, wait, we see something different. And when there's an opportunity for me to leave, go somewhere else, I am. And so I think the great other piece of the Great Resignation is the opportunity for both employees who are looking for new opportunities, but specifically also for leaders and organizations to go, am I going to be caught on the tail end of this, being the people who are, being the company that people are resigning from? Or am I offering something in terms of my value that somehow, as this giant wave, this tidal wave of resignation goes all over the place, that our organization somehow comes out of this not so magically, relatively unscathed? And I think smart leaders are recognizing there's a huge opportunity here, especially not just unscathed, but you know what? If there is the proverbial war on talent has never been higher, you may be in a position to now attract and engage some of the best and brightest people out there. So the question is, what are you doing consciously and intentionally as a leader and as a company to attract and engage and retain and bring in those people who are ready for, well, mixed metaphor slightly, greener pastures, as it were.
Interesting. So when you do your research and you've done your research on this and you look at these statistics and then you have these conversations with leaders and companies about this, what are people are they resigning from something to something else, or like what are they really saying no to in this process? I guess is my question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tim. So, what people are saying no to is the same old status quo. Okay, and let's go back to pre March of 2020. which is what they're saying no to is the value equation of the amount of time and effort that I spend at work at this job is just not worth the return, whether that's the financial, the emotional, etc. Because it's not just the paycheck. It's my sense of meaning, my sense of purpose, my sense of belonging, my sense of well-being. They're saying, no, this value equation does not add up to me. And part of why people are feeling free to say no in record numbers is because they've lived through a really difficult time. And they went, you know what? Had you said that I had to work from home and do all these things, I would have never believed you. But I did. And had you said that we would have to make do with less, and gosh, we couldn't go out to eat in a restaurant for so long, and I had to spend time with my family, and wow, suddenly people's values have come into question. And probably the biggest value that came into question was literally, what is my life really about? Because when you are staring life and death in the face on a daily basis, in other words, I can't go out because there's this deadly disease, suddenly it crystallizes and prioritizes people's values. So what people were saying no to was the old value equation, and what they're ultimately saying yes to is connecting to a deeper sense of purpose, meaning, and their personal values.
That's interesting. You know, when we first started exploring this idea, when we first connected about a month and a half ago, I had to do a lot of reflecting in my own life because, you know, although I haven't resigned from something, and that I didn't resign from my own business because that might not have been a good thing for me, I do see this pattern in my own life because for me in my own journey, you know, in 2019, I traveled just well over 150 days for business in 2019. Came back from my last business trip, flew back on the 16th of March 2020, and then spent the better part now of a year and a half with a 21-step journey between where I work, where I sleep, and where I relieve myself. So my world has got a little bit smaller. But what I found in the process, and even my wife and I began to work through this, is that, you know, we had a plan in place that at a point in time, I'm 56, I'm in my mid-50s, and so we had a plan in place that I would, you know, sort of step back maybe from some of the things I was doing and start working 4 days, or working 4 days a week, and then 3 days a week and stuff, and that was out in the future. What I found through this time is I began to resign in some ways, or when I think of resign, give over to, okay? The idea that I don't have to wait. And so we've started to reinvent our own lives. And so last year we ordered a 20-foot travel trailer. We've started this idea. This year we did 10 weeks. Next year I'm going to do 12. I'm going to do some remote work when I go away because apparently you can work remotely. You know, customers that I worked with for years who said, oh, no, you got to fly here to coach me. All of a sudden, I didn't have to fly there to coach them. And so all of a sudden things are changing even in our thing. And so I'm not resigning from a career or a job and maybe going somewhere else, but I've resigned myself over to a new paradigm of understanding how I can engage my customers, my clients over distance and all of that. And so although maybe not exactly the same or the heart of what we're talking about, this is how I see it working out in my own life, actually.
Yeah. You know, you're bringing such a good point here, Tim, which is, you know, as people are resigning around this, or you're saying resigning in your own life, I think, you know, humans, we look for simplistic answers, and we love binary. It's like you're either all in or you're all out. Well, and I think people are recognizing no. I mean, the hybrid model is a multiple pronged model. Like you're saying, how can I get into a trailer and potentially travel around and be a digital nomad and work with my clients from a distance and then do other things? And I think people, whether they meant to, but most of us got kind of shoved there because before the pandemic, so many of us, like, I could never change. I'll give you an example. One of my neighbors works in the shipping industry. And in the shipping industry, you know, this is like big container ships. For literally hundreds and hundreds of years, you need to have a paper sign, hand signed. They call it the bill of lading. It's the bill of everything on. And they refused to change that. Well, you know what? 2 weeks into coronavirus pandemic, electronic bill of lading is fine. You know, so it's amazing. One of my other colleagues who works in the field of change management and change leadership said to me early days, that I am jealous of the coronavirus. What do you mean you're jealous? What a controversial thing to say. What do you mean you're jealous? He said, I work with companies trying to get them to change, and this virus comes in and got people moved forward years ahead in a couple of weeks that I could never do. And so just think about, so we are all in flux. And so what are you and I and all the listeners, what are you doing to take advantage of this flux? And what are you willing to say no to now that you weren't willing to say no to because you didn't even know you could? And so it is interesting times, to say the least.
It is. And listen, if you're listening in today, don't discount or just pass over what Alain just said. That is a very provocative question that you need to consider, because at the end of the day, if all you do is listen to this podcast and you don't ask yourself a sub-series of questions as a result of your listening, nothing will change. You'll have wasted, frankly, maybe 40 minutes of your life with no action to take from it. The action will result if you provoke yourself through questions, and that's a great question. What do you need to? What are you willing to say no to today that you may not have been in the future, which actually has the power to release fresh things, new ideas, new life to you, your family, your business, your colleagues, your world, your communities? That's a provocative question. Please ask yourself after this podcast. Consider it. Think about it with your significant others and your family and in your work world. Challenge yourself with that question. Let it be a provocateur to you so that it can actually strike a chord of new thinking and new action in you. It's a very, very profound way of thinking about it. How about for you, Alain? What is this shift looking like for you even? Are you seeing this in your world, in your personal world, your business world?
My world has changed radically. So just to give you a sense, so in July of 2018, our family, I've got two kids who we're in 2021 recording this. They're 17 and 14, but we moved over there. They were 14 and 11. We moved to the Netherlands about 3 years ago, and we lived in the Netherlands for 2 years with the plan to come back, which we did. We came back in August of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and basically came back to the U.S. My book was launched on March the 24th of 2020, which opened like the week after the world shut down. The book comes out. And so it's been a ton. And also 95% of my work was face-to-face training, speaking, and coaching. So suddenly, the word of the year was pivot, shift. How do I do things? So you asked earlier, how did you end up with the New Delhi Institute of Management? Through meeting people on Zoom and showing up and getting invited to do a panel discussion that was co-sponsored. It was a symposium that was co-sponsored by the New Delhi Institute of Management and the Graduate School of Leadership and Education at Pepperdine University. And obviously I impressed someone at the New Delhi Institute of Management along, like, hey, would you do this? And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk for 410 of their MBA students. So it's just amazingly, and again, had this all happened pre-COVID, we wouldn't have had the norms where everyone would have taken, now, like, oh yeah, I'll meet with you. I've never met you, but let's meet online. I mean, the world has shrunk enormously in some ways because of this, because we're not traveling. So now what's changed for me is, so much of my world is now, interfaced through Zoom, through a camera, through online living and working. And the other, to build on what you said before, Tim, around, it feels much more like I have to make strong decisions. And it's not just saying, what am I saying no to? Because realizing what am I saying no to is what frees up what I say yes to. Or as one of my coaches said to me a few months ago, as I was kind of navigating this, because I think we all need a coach in some way, shape, or form, they said, here's the mantra. As different opportunities come in, of which there are many, the mantra was, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And I have used that, right? So, because, I can say yes to so many different things. There's so many things in this world that can occupy your time. You can go down the YouTube rabbit hole and spend, 8 hours watching videos of cats doing all sorts of things. Do I want to spend my time? Do I want to look back on my life and think that's what I spent my time on? So I love this idea of, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. Because I think for all of us, clarifying what are your core values, what is your deeper purpose and meaning, and how do you uncover and discover what that is then what is going to lead you, if you clarify those things about your meaning, your vision, your values, your purpose, then suddenly you can ask yourself as you look back on each day, did I live today on purpose? Am I doing things that are furthering my mission forward? And being able to talk to you and share these ideas with people, totally on purpose. So this is a great day. So it's looking at, for each of us, clarifying, clarifying, clarifying. And that is a work continuously in process.
So if you're listening, I just want to be clear about this. So when you listen back to this, that means Alain Hunkins said, hell yes, to the Uncommodified podcast, which, by
Hell
the way,
yes, I
makes me
did.
feel awful pretty good because I imagine you have been on a few podcasts in the last little while, possibly a few of them.
Just a few, something like 145 at this point since March of 2020. So yeah, just a
So I
few.
appreciate you making me a hell yes because I know you're a busy man. I appreciate that. So listen, let's tip back into this thing about this great resignation. So what do you see this ultimately meaning for? I really want to look at three different groups. Okay, so I want you to think about what does this really mean for employees,
Hmm.
and how do they need to think about this? And if you're an employee in a company, what does this mean for employers? And ultimately, what does it mean for the leaders in those organizations? Though, if you could sort of parse that out in three different ways and help us sort of touch onto this subject from these three vantage points.
Sure. So if we look at what is the Great Resignation and the implications of it, what does it mean for employees? I think it first starts with what it means is employees are kind of looking to their left, looking to their right, and going, "Oh, Tim's not here anymore. Where'd he go?" I think people are asking themselves these bigger questions that we touched on earlier. Why am I here? What does this mean? Is this worth the value proposition? And so for employees, they are looking for ways to, we have certain fundamental human needs that need to get taken care of. One is around this sense of safety. So that's physical safety, there's psychological safety, and part of that is also belonging. So this is where, to me, equity and inclusion comes in, and diversity is obviously a subset of that. So this sense of, do I belong here? And people want to know that. People also are looking, as employees, they have this need that is the work that I'm doing energizing to me. So they're looking to have those needs met around, how is my work life structured, and is the company giving me tools to support things so that I can be energized? For example, within that, something as specific as, do I get emails all day and night, and is there an expectation that I'll respond all day and night? Because that is massively draining and not sustainable over time. So employees are, internally, they're doing the little checkbox. Am I safe? Is there energy? And then they want to also, do they have a sense of ownership over their work? So for employees, they want to know that they have autonomy, that they are not being micromanaged, like you have to do this exactly this way. They want some guardrails, but then they want to be let loose so they can be able to bring their own creativity and innovation to what they're doing. That's key. So we've got safety, energy, innovation, and then also purpose. We talked about this earlier. So how do they see that what they're doing is contributing to something larger than themselves, that the company actually is doing something that is of value to society other than, generic boilerplate increasing shareholder value? It's like, I ask people sometimes, I've asked this for many years where I've asked people, so what's the purpose of your business? What's the big picture mission? And if they come back and say something like, well, it's to make a profit. It's like, so why are you in this business? Why aren't you selling cocaine? Right? Because the profit margins are much higher. Oh, it happens to be illegal in most countries, but still, like, if that's it. So you have to understand what is the bigger picture purpose. So ultimately, employees are looking for these four things. They're looking for safety, they're looking for energy, they're looking for ownership, they're looking for purpose. So I think that addresses what the implications of this are for the employee. For the employer specifically, we'll talk about like the mid-level manager in this, is what are you doing day to day with your immediate direct reports, with your immediate team, to make sure those needs are met. And you actually, not only do you have the biggest impact on your employees, Gallup did some great research and found that 70% of the difference between lousy, good, and great culture and ultimately performance is directly due to the immediate supervisor. So as the employer here, and I'm assuming again, direct report, that immediate supervisor, what are you doing to make sure those needs are being met on a day-to-day basis? And what you need to be doing, I think, is the implication here is you need to be, especially if you're doing this remotely, but it doesn't matter, even if you're doing it face-to-face, is you need to be leaning in to becoming exceptionally human and exceptionally more communicative. Most people, and employers for that matter, fall short in this, that we tend to assume, oh yeah, my people know that I care about them. It's kind of like the equivalent, Tim, is if you have been married for 20 years and like, yeah, I told my wife that I love her on our wedding day. And nothing's changed, so I don't need to say it again, do I? It's like, actually, if you want to maintain a healthy relationship, you do. And if
Yeah.
you're an employer, you need to be on a consistent basis leaning into this exceptional connection of humanity, of communication. I call it the difference between checking in and checking up, right? So it's not about checking up, like, are you still working? It's checking in, like, hey, how are things going? And celebrating the small wins and supporting them. So those are some things that employers can do. And in terms of the leaders of those organizations, you need to be taking a look at these same four principles of safety, energy, ownership, and purpose. But you have to be thinking about what are we doing with our systems and our structures to design these systems so that they support our employer, that are our managers, and our employees, so they're getting these needs met. And you have to think of yourself as a behavioral choice architect. What I mean by that is, if, for example, in the world of behavioral choice comes from behavioral economics, and I'll give you a simple example. And there's been all sorts of food research that have found that if you want people to eat smaller portions of food, actually serve the food on smaller plates. Now, you and I think, wait, 5 ounces of vegetables is 5 ounces of vegetables. No, actually 5 ounces on vegetables on a smaller plate appears and is more satisfying than it is on a large plate. So all of which to say is, what are we doing to create systems that are going to support people? Because all of our managers, our frontline leaders, and all of our employees come into work with really good intentions. But one of my favorite quotes around this comes from, I think it was from Peter Drucker, who once said, you can put a good person in a bad system, and the bad system will win every time. So we want to make sure that we are setting up systems. And, for example, so one thing to consider, and this is something that we as senior leaders can coach other leaders on, is, and this has to do with energy. So most of us are using some kind of Apple or Microsoft operating system on our calendars where the default settings are 30 and 60-minute meetings. Well, I'm sure everyone listening knows what it's like to go from a 60-minute meeting to the next 60-minute meeting to the next 60-minute meeting all day long. And that after about meeting 3, your brain is about ready to fall out of your ears, because it works on paper, but it doesn't work for humans. So one thing systemically, and I coach organizations and leaders to do this, is let's change our default times for meetings to 50 minutes or 25 minutes. So that gives people some transition time to go to the next thing. Not to mention, take the 12-step walk over to the washroom if need be. It's to start to factor in the humanity. Again, you are not living and working in an assembly line in a factory in the industrial age. You are working with knowledge workers in the digital age. And as such, it isn't about always focusing on efficiency, because sometimes efficiency comes in spite of effectiveness, and we lose effectiveness. So as the senior leaders thinking about this, think about what can you do to design environments to do this. And if you want to go into more detail on this, the entire 3rd section of the book, Cracking Leadership Code, dives way deep into these 4 needs of safety, energy, ownership, and purpose.
Okay, and that's going to sort of tuck into my next question. And by the way, I love I often, when people use certain words, I see them. I think that's the way the human mind works. You see them. And when you use the term lean into, the image in my mind was this: the Great Resignation is a howling wind that is just blowing down the chasms of Wall Street and Bay Street in Canada, and right down these juggernauts of economies.
Yeah.
And you have a choice how you orientate yourself to that. You can lean into the wind and you can capture it, or you can resist it, and it will absolutely destroy you and your ship. You have a choice of how you trim your sail into that and lean into it. So I think that's phenomenal, powerful advice, but also from a visual perspective. Again, my challenge to you, if you're listening, as a person, as an organization, will you lean into this change and let it fill your sails with energy to take you forward, or will you resist it and will it crack your mainsail? Because you have a choice about how you're going to respond. You can't control the wind. I don't think we're going to control the wind of this Great Resignation. Would you agree, Alain?
No, you're not going to control the wind. I mean, there's a massive demographic at play. You can't control the main thing. So it's focusing on what is it that you can do, and one of the things that I'm coaching, and I'm doing a lot of work with individual leaders at multiple levels in organizations right now, is one of the things, because again, it's a great metaphor, like lean into it, but like what does that mean practically? at a practical, very tactical, tangible level for each of us, it's what are you doing to strengthen your mental fitness? And what I mean by mental fitness is your ability to respond to the demands of life, aka the Great Resignation, aka coronavirus, aka the stresses and pressures of every day. How do you respond to those things operating from a positive rather than a negative mindset? So a negative mindset sees all of those events and responds with fear and upset and shame and worry and stress and anxiety. Right? The positive mindset goes, is creative and curious and looks at these things as potential opportunities and responds with, how does this connect to my mission and purpose? And believe it or not, that mental fitness is something that can be trained over time. Actually, I lead people through an intensive 6-week boot camp on how to do so. So whichever way you do it, ultimately it comes down to what are you personally going to do to manage it? Because you can't manage it for the world. What you can do is you can manage it for yourself.
Awesome, and I totally agree with that. So let me ask you a quick question about the book, and we didn't talk about this, but as we're talking, it just comes to my mind. So you write this book, it gets released right on the front end of the pandemic. I imagine that a big part of promoting a book these days is going around and doing what you normally do, which is speak, and obviously you haven't been doing a lot of that in with large public gatherings. But let me ask you, so there are core principles that you unpacked over and understood over a number of years, and you've put them in this book. It comes out at this time. Would you say that I think sometimes a book comes out and, there are timeless principles. They apply to the past, they apply to the present and the future. But sometimes there is, and I'll use the word, prophetic in the sense that there's a prophetic nature to some things that you read it and you say, wow, this really resonates in such a time as this. So I guess when you think about your book and you write this book, not knowing, obviously, unless you orchestrated the great pandemic, which I imagine you didn't, do you feel that there are some things in your book, principles, ideas, thoughts, that actually are for such a time as this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's funny because I was talking to someone last week on their podcast, and they had read the book, and they said, oh my gosh, all this stuff seemed, they didn't say prophetic prescience, right? Like, wow, the sense of you were anticipating this. This seems even more applicable. And I think it is. And here's why. So the book wasn't me sitting down at my desk, in my office or a study for a bunch of years and like, here's my book. The book came out of working with tens of thousands of leaders over the course of 20 years. I mean, whether I started writing, I was thinking about that. The writing of itself came out of stories and examples. And what I saw over those years was a shift that is continuing to go on. And I call it the shift from moving from old school leadership, that command and control, being that commander in chief, to new school, being that facilitator in chief. And I think that trend was already started. Why the book might seem prophetic is because the nature of coronavirus and working from home and being remote has made the need to become a facilitator in chief that much more important, because you can't rely on the face-to-face ability to just pick up on the vibe of what's going on with your people. You have to now be so much more intentional about, gosh, I don't see you in person. What can I do to be intentional about this? So the fact is, the leaders who are really good at connecting, communicating, and collaborating before this event of coronavirus actually transitioned pretty well. They went, oh, I know I have to be intentional to connect, communicate, and collaborate. Now I need to do it through the interface of the digital age. Okay, do that. The people that were sort of floundering before are really floundering now. So is it prophetic? Yes and no. In that I really think that we have seen this shift. And if you look really about this shift, who has precipitated the need for this, it's thank you millennials, thank you Gen Z in the workplace, who are now the majority of our workforce, where basically they came in, we talked earlier about the value equation, and they looked at Gen X, they looked at baby boomers, and they looked at, these kind of couple of generations that were still very much, roll up your sleeves, put your head down, be a good, loyal person. They're like, what? I'll give you an example. I was working with one of the big four consulting firms, and for years, the model of consulting was they would recruit the sharpest, the best and brightest out of college, and they put them to work, but they'd throw them on the road. They'd go out on Sunday nights, and they'd be out 5 or 6 nights a week, and then they'd go home, do their laundry for the weekend, rinse and repeat. And they'd just do this for a few years. They knew they would churn and burn a bunch of people, but the people that would stick with it, they would become their managers and their senior managers and ultimately their partners. And this is like the firm's model and mindset. And they've been doing it like this for decades. Well, the millennials joined the workforce. They basically went, no thanks. Like, I'm looking at your partner. Like, you get a corner office, but look, your health is crap. You're miserable. You don't see a family. Forget it. I don't believe in that. I'll quit this job and I'll go move back in with my parents. And guess what? A lot of them did, to the point where a lot of these firms said, we have to rethink our hiring and our whole grooming practices of people. And so the world has shifted. People are no longer willing just to go along with this idea of success equals more money. So many people realize, and look, the pandemic exacerbated that. The pandemic went, wow, you know what? We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but what kind of relationships do I have with my family, with my kids, with my spouse, with my friends? You know, what am I? How is my health? Like, how am I spending my time? Because a lot of us had been on this wheel of conspicuous consumption, like just kind of work and work and work and just strive to achieve so I can get a bigger house or a bigger car or a bigger corner office. And, a lot of people have stepped off of that treadmill. Some people call it the great pause, and it made people stop and question what was going on. And so I bring all this up because, yeah, in some ways it was prophetic, but in some ways this is a leadership model whose time has been coming for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and as you say that too, I think the other thing I think that people are resigning from is they're resigning from a subset of values. They're resigning from ideologies
Yeah.
that they no longer want to espouse to. And so in this process, they're signing up. They're saying no. They're resigning from a subset of values they no longer want to possess, and they're saying hell yes to another subset of values which if we're not careful, a person my age is easy to say their values are not as good as my value. That's not what this is about. They're trading and resigning from a value set that maybe my generation held deeply to a value set that their generation needs to hold deeply that will ultimately take them into their preferred future. So I think that resonates to me as well. They're also resigning from values that no longer fit the nature of how they want to live and experience the world around them. It's really a fascinating idea.
Such a good point, Tim. I think your distinction around what they're resigning from is spot on. And I'll build on that in that, and I'd love to take credit for this idea, but a colleague of mine at Duke Corporate Education, Michael Chavez, has written a book called Rehumanizing Leadership. And he talks and writes about the fact that, because a lot of people, older generations have always looked at the younger generations and said, those young whippersnappers, they're like that. But what's different now is if you think about the changes in the world, right, especially the digital age. So we've got this amazing new technology. Well, now, for the first time ever, the people who are digital natives, who actually know how to use and can continue to build out that technology, are that very youngest generation. We've never had that in the history of generations. Right? It was always someone else had the power of the technology. Well, now that power is in the hands of those people, which has completely democratized and changed their understanding of the global collective in society. So anyway, I know that's getting very meta, but I think it's worth bringing out.
You remind me of something the other day that happened, and again, this just shows a shift in technology. So my grandson, who's 4 years old, was over a couple weeks ago. We have two grandchildren, a 2-year-old granddaughter and a 4-year-old grandson. And my phone rang, and Jude grabbed my phone, and instead of putting it to his ear, he picked it up and he looked at it. And this aha moment for me was, wow, I see that as a funky telephone, much better than the landline I used to have, or the one that you cranked on the side or smoke signals we sent.
Yeah.
He doesn't see that as a primary device that goes against his ear. He sees it a primary device that he looks in and speaks to somebody and sees a visual.
Yeah.
And I tell you, it was a revelation to me, Alain. I was like, okay, there is a shift here in the way he's interacting with this device that is transformative.
Yeah.
And it just really punched me in the face. And it also reminded me that I see this as a funky telephone, and I'm old school.
Yeah.
And I got to keep reinventing the wonder and the magic And I'm hoping that the next time my phone rings, I pick it up and look at it and expect it to speak to me as opposed to have to shove it against my ear, because
Yeah.
there's something moving in the way people interact with this in a powerful way.
Yeah, there is. There is. So for me, it's finding, so the variations on technology, because, tomorrow there'll be a new app for this and that, and what's the principle underneath? And I think for me, I always ask as an adult educator, what's the principle? And ultimately, as humans, because I don't think our DNA and our brains are going to change that much in the next 100 years. We're all going to want to stay connected. We want to belong. We want to feel like we're safe. We're part of something meaningful. It's funny because whether or not there's a purpose to life, we don't know. But what we do know is that the need for having a purpose is fundamentally human. I mean, it might be that this is one giant cosmic joke. We don't know that. And the need to strive for that is so essentially human. It hasn't changed for thousands of years. So I think for any of us in a leadership role, being able to leverage and harness and tap into the power of purpose and understanding belonging and what it means to be fundamentally human, because there's a reason that certain movies blow up and become popular, because those stories speak to us at this archetypal level. We're all on this hero's journey of separating from where we came from, going through some kind of an ordeal or challenge, having to be strengthened. I mean, these are archetypes, and they play on the human psyche. So as leaders, we need to be at least amateur psychologists to understand, if I work with people, because I don't care if you can be in manufacturing business, you can be in pharmaceuticals, you can be in technology. First and foremost, if you are a leader, you are in the people business, because all of that work and all those metrics that you love so much only happen as a result of the behaviors of people. And people's behaviors only come as a result of their mindset and their skill sets.
Yeah, so true and so powerful. So I'm going to give a shameless plug for a prior podcast of mine. If you're listening to this one, I released a couple of weeks ago a podcast with a friend of mine, Dave Webb, who is a guru SAP guy internationally, globally. And the subtitle of that podcast is Humanizing Big Ass Change. And I tell you, I just learned a lot from Dave about the missing the mark of leaders who see big system change as process change, and not understand that it isn't process change. It is human change, and the impact on humans through the change process. So totally understand and feel that fits so well into the arc of what we're talking about. Listen, let's bring this in for a landing. Alain, first of all, thanks again for your time. If people want to find you, if they want to engage with you, if they want to hire you, if they want to find your book and you, how do they do that, by the way?
Yeah, easiest place is go to All Things Hunkins Leadership Group, which is my website, which is alainhunkins.com. I'll spell it for you. It's www.alainhunkins.com. You can learn all about the various ways I serve people through speaking, training, consulting, coaching. You can also actually book a 30-minute free discovery session with me if you have some questions around any of my work. You can go right to my calendar and book a time with me on that. You can also there's lots of resources, whether they're other podcast episodes, articles, a blog with lots of blogs, and also there you can go to the book, has its own landing page within there. You can order the book from Amazon or anywhere else, as well as you can download the first chapter of the book for free and get a little taste of what we're talking about here today.
Awesome. If you don't have this book, I really encourage you, as my listeners, find it, get it, read it, and don't just get it and put it on yourself and say that you have it, because that's not really good enough. I have some books like that. I have that book. Doesn't mean I read it. You should read it and apply it, because there's power within it. So listen. Let's tuck this conversation and this connection that we're having into the world of uncommodified. So uncommodified for me is this idea that most things around us are commodities. We can get them other places. Humans by nature should be rather uncommodified, but unfortunately we tend to give in to conformity, and we fall in line and fit in, and we come under the evil spell of sameness, I think I would like to say. So when you're out there, Alain, doing your thing, when you're putting the Alain on it, and only how you can do it in the world you work in, what are you doing at your most uncommodified best? Because I hate to tell you, but there are a few consultant coaches and trainers out there. There's a few of them, and some of them, not to be disrespectful, but they're commodities, actually.
Yeah, sure.
I know you're not. So my question is, when you're bringing that unique edge of who you are,
Yeah.
what are you bringing to the groups of people that you work with?
Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind. I love this question, Tim. The first is somebody said, like, what is your superpower? And I said, my superpower is actually creating safe space for other people, whether that's in a group, whether it's one-on-one. So one thing is I know how to make people feel included. Number two, what makes me uncommodified is my background. We didn't get into this whole part of my background. So I have my master's degree is in MFA, Master's in Fine Arts. I actually went to an acting conservatory for 3 years, and I think there's a huge value that comes from the performing arts. I sometimes say leadership is a performing art, and I don't mean by that you're faking it. What I mean is like if you go to a great movie or a great ballet or a theater play musical, what you're paying for is to be fully engaged from minute one till the time the curtain goes down and the lights come back up. And so one of the things that I know how to do is to shape an experience. Notice I'm already doing this with my hands. I'm shaping an experience because I think about where are people going on this journey of discovery with me. Because what I see as my role is to guide people on journeys to discover their own brilliance and then apply it. And so I think what is my uncommoditization power is understanding that how safety and then that experience goes together where people walk away and go, oh my gosh, this is amazing and this was all about me. Because ultimately, you don't want coaching, you don't want speaking, you don't want training, you don't want consulting. What you want is you want to achieve performance goals easier. You want to achieve what you want in your life and have better relationships and to have more well-being or balance or a sense of purpose and mission. So it's both the results and the relationships piece. And my goal is to find ways to help you to achieve those results. It isn't for the work that I do, it's to help you.
I love that. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. So, listen, as we finish up, I'm going to give you one last opportunity to challenge or encourage our listeners around this idea, the Great Resignation. What's the last thing that you want to park in their mind as they leave this time that they've spent with us?
Yeah. So what I'd invite you to think about is whether it's big or small, what is the next thing in your life that you are ready to resign from? That is, what are you ready to say no to so that you can ultimately say hell yes to something else? And I'd invite you to take that with you. And as you go through your next couple of weeks, just survey the landscape. One of my mentors says, you can't change what you don't notice. And if you're like most people, like me and people that I coach, there are things that we've been saying yes to for too long. And it's time to say no so that we can make space to say hell yes to those new opportunities.
Awesome. Thanks. Alain, first of all, thank you for your time today. You're a busy man. You've got a lot of engagements. And the fact that you would spend some time with me and my listeners is a real gift to them, and I really appreciate that. And for those of you listening, we appreciate you taking some time to listen in today. And again, please don't just listen. Activate some of these ideas in your life. And when you do me a favor. Email me at tim@theuncommodified.com or connect with me on social media and let Alain and I know how you're uncorking this, how you're taking the cork off this thing and letting it flow out into your life, your business life, your personal life, your professional life, whatever life you want to push this into. And as you do, break the evil spell of sameness and stand out and stand up for all the right reasons. Thank you very much and have an excellent day.